The White House says we can expect to see a significantly higher National Guard presence on the ground throughout Washington, D.C. by tonight. A senior Army official tells NBC that the first troops began deploying with local police last night. Their focus, security and crowd management, not making arrests or performing direct law enforcement. But a White House official says that multi-agency teams have made more than 100 arrests since the deployment was announced. And as the Washington Post notes, the arrival of the National Guard brings with it uncertainty over command of the D.C. police. I want to bring in a member of the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, Officer Daniel Hodges, who was on duty during the January 6th assault on the Capitol when he was violently beaten by the mob. I want to thank you for being on the program. Officer Hodges, do you know who's in charge of law enforcement in the nation's capital right now? How do things feel out there?
Thanks for having me, Chris. Speaking on my own behalf and not on behalf of my employer, as far as I know, the chain of command has not changed, at least for the day-to-day police officers in D.C. The emergency federalization doesn't make a lot of sense to me because deploying these National Guard troops to D.C., I served as a Virginia National Guard member for 6 years, and I can tell you that this is not what they're trained to do. Soldiers are trained to fight and win wars. We're not in a war out here in D.C. It's there's crime out here, but it's not a war-torn hellscape like Trump has said. It's the troops are not trained to do law enforcement. This is not their lane. This is not what they're supposed to be doing.
So what could be realistically expected of them? Because, as I said, the White House put out this statement and they said multi-agency teams. I think, for example, if you want to talk about managing crowds, yes, certainly for big events, there are crowds in Washington, D.C. I don't know, having lived there for 3 years on a day-to-day basis, that we see huge crowds of people necessarily around Washington. What do you make of a kind of partnership? Can it be useful?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any enormous events that warrant the deployment of hundreds of National Guard units for crowd control. With regards to federal partners, we could always use more hands, but I don't think this is really their specialization either. So many of these federal officers are investigators. They're supposed to be behind a desk, working that way, but they're not. You're going to see them standing around in Chinatown or on the mall or walking around Georgetown. They're not going east of the river. They're not doing what really needs to be done around here for help. So it could be helpful, but I don't think it's going to be.
I wonder and maybe you've had these conversations with your fellow officers, your partner. What did you think when you heard the president? He suggested this before when he describes D.C. as being crime-ridden, a hellscape. Do you feel it's a personal attack on you and your fellow officers?
No, I don't think it's a personal attack on the police when he says that. Like, there is crime in D.C. I'm not going to pretend there isn't, but it's not exactly Mogadishu out here. It's very. There are things that the federal government can do to help. First of all, is actually allow D.C. to spend its own money. Right now, we're $1 billion in the hole, and the government can't approve the raise that's already been signed for D.C. police. So there's one thing. FEMA also slashed its assistance to D.C. police by, I think, 44%, just for whatever reason that they want to cut government spending for. So there are things that they can do to help us out that they're not doing, and I would love to know why.
80 shots fired into the CDC. This major attack on a federal government facility has so far garnered no response whatsoever from President Donald Trump, let alone an armed response into Atlanta, where the CDC headquarters is. But he did send in the National Guard to Washington, D.C. today because tough on crime, you think? Maybe it's not about crime. Maybe it's not about defending the federal government from threats, right? Maybe it's not about that. Maybe it's not about crime. Maybe it's not about any other thing he might voice. Maybe it's what you can see with your own two eyes. Maybe it's that he really enjoys using U.S. military force against American civilians on American soil and wants any excuse to do it anywhere he can. Watch what they do, not what they say. Because, I mean, given what else he's done on the issue of crime, does it make sense that him sending in the troops for a military takeover of Washington, D.C. is about crime? I mean, that's what he said. But what do you think based on what he's done? Because meanwhile, while he's talking about crime, he has sent in the National Guard and active duty U.S. Marines to Los Angeles as well, right? Supposedly to save that city from protests against him. That deployment was so inexplicable and so palpably disconnected from its purported justifications that the LA Times reported on a spike in calls to the GI Rights hotline, with military personnel telling that hotline they didn't want to be deployed to point guns at citizens. Military personnel telling that hotline they, quote, didn't want to be on the side of being armed occupiers in their own country. The New York Times reported the troops recoiling from Trump's use of them in Los Angeles. In more pungent terms, quote, at least one company commander and one battalion commander who objected to the mission were reassigned to work unrelated to the mobilization. Some troops became so disgruntled that there were several reports of soldiers defecating in Humvees and in the showers at the Southern California base where the troops are stationed, prompting tightened bathroom security. Tightened bathroom security. Despite that military triumph in Los Angeles, we've now got Trump using military bases now all over the country to hold massive new immigrant prison camps, which he is planning on military bases at Fort Bliss in Texas and Camp Atterbury in Indiana and Joint Base McGuire-Dix Lakehurst in New Jersey. Trump has also expanded huge swaths of Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona into what he's calling, quote, military zones, in which he's legally expanded the boundaries of local military bases into huge hundreds of miles long territories, where he's now given U.S. active duty troops the instruction and authority to stop and search and arrest Americans on domestic U.S. soil. Watch what they do, not what they say. He wants U.S. military force deployed on U.S. soil facing inward as a show of force to the American people about what he and the government can do to you. People in D.C. are already protesting against it. This was just today. Just as people in Los Angeles protested against it when Trump tried it there as well. This weekend, people protested in Los Angeles against ongoing immigration raids and arrests there. Those protests have not stopped in Los Angeles, with or without the National Guard and the Marines there to try to scare everyone into not protesting. People protested in Columbus, Ohio this weekend as well. Hands along High Street, they called it. Protest in Columbus, Ohio, where protesters lined the streets for 8 solid miles, protesting against what Trump is doing. This woman in Florida is 104 years old. She has been protesting every week, every Thursday with her neighbors and friends. Her sign in this picture says here, girls just want to have fun. Ding for scientific research. She's 104. She'll be 105 years old this week. And she is protesting against the Trump administration 1 out of her every 7 days. What are you doing with your life, you spring chicken? When Donald Trump sent troops to Los Angeles this summer on the absurd pretext that some kind of war was on, Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass and other LA officials didn't just protest against it and try to stop it. They also warned the country that, yeah, he's doing this to us first, but it's going to be you next. They were clear-eyed about that. They were right. And we, clearly, are now in the part of the attempted authoritarian takeover where our authoritarian leader just starts trying to turn our own military to face us, the people of this country. And the questions that are equally important in response to that right now are, number one, what will the troops do about that? And number two, what will we do?
While also pushing back and telling district residents that she understands their frustrations at the way that 700,000 people who live in D.C. don't really get a say in how this is being handled. She is in a politically difficult position, though, as she's also trying to make sure that a big stadium deal goes through to get the NFL team back into the District of Columbia, something that the president could probably make much more difficult if he so chose. So the mayor trying to walk a real tightrope here politically and for her voters, the district residents, over these next 30 days.
Okay, I think we have some sound with, I'm told no sound. Thank you, Garrett. Let me bring in the secretary here with us. Thank you so much, Secretary Napolitano, for being here. So local officials often work hand in hand, we know, with the federal government, D.C. more than any state, but this is provoking strong reaction in the capital region. Take a listen to Maryland Governor Wes Moore last night.
This is a deeply expensive game that the president is using, where he's using taxpayer dollars, millions of them, to try to put on this demonstration of force that frankly just makes him look weak.
How do you see this takeover?
Well, I think the question is this just performative theater, or is it real? Is it a real strategic plan to reduce crime in the D.C. area? Now, we know the stats. We know that violent crime in the D.C. area is at a 30-year low. So let's start with that. But, crime then is not about a statistic. It's about victims and real crimes being committed. And so every mayor across the country wants to bring that crime rate down as close to zero as possible. But that requires a strategy. It requires targeting specific high crime areas. Ward 7 and 8 in D.C., I think, are the two most high crime areas. They're not.
This move was failing, much like it did in California, and much like his military parade did. All it did was rouse people out of a slumber. Again, we got to remember this. Back when he first came to power, there wasn't protests like there was the first Trump presidency. When he came to power initially, the second time, things were quiet because it wasn't exactly clear how bad it was going to be. People were tired and demoralized. And then when he started doing things like this, it woke people up. It was the cuts to the programs Americans need and love, and how they saw their neighbors losing their jobs. They saw their neighbors being brutalized. Yes, all of that, certainly. But the politicized use of police force and of military force against citizens was something that woke people up. And you're seeing it. You're seeing it not just in D.C., not just in California, where it was directly done, but in other parts of the country. Donald messed up big time. And what's critical is we've talked about this, he's also lost the support to a degree of officers that don't want to be pitted against citizens, and officers that, frankly, are being put in positions that they weren't trained for. You're taking dedicated expert investigators who are not beat cops. You're taking them off multi-million dollar criminal investigations into international crimes and corporate crimes and the worst monsters of crime. And you're putting them on your little stunt here so that you can, you're playing with them like they're little action figures, little dolls, and they're offended too. No one likes this, Donald.